Perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our August, that's right, August Forgotten Grapes virtual tasting. So excited to have everyone here and to be joined by Lague from Mesa Vineyards up in the Sierra Foothills, our first ever Sierra Foothills, Amador County, Shenandoah Valley. It keeps getting narrower and narrower. You've got way too many designations up there.
Or maybe search your camera.
All right, we're muting you, Matt. Sorry. There you go. So as always, if you've got any questions, we're gonna keep everybody muted during the main part of the chat. Just feel free to throw your comments, your questions for Comb into the chat, and Allison and I will ask them. Just as an FYI for everybody, the email for the next month's offer, which is a really fun new raw winemaking company that Allison and I discovered at the Raw Wine Festival, Billy D Wines / Ramble Wines, two brands in one. That email will be going out next Tuesday, so keep an eye out for that. But before we move on to September, let's focus on August and our very special guest, Comb Lague. Comb, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. I love doing these, and I'm so happy to share our wines with all of you.
Awesome. So we always start off with asking you, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you have ever opened?
Well, I would have to say, a few weeks ago, I had a winemaker dinner for just 12 of our club members. It was kind of it was at my house, basically. I did the cooking. It was a kind of a gourmet meal. And I found that I had just a few bottles left of my oldest vintage, one of the first ones that I had made. So this was a 2013 Barbera, so almost 10 years of aging, despite several house moves and maybe not necessarily the best climatized conditions. I was very attached to this wine because it was basically what launched me into the wine business. Basically, I was a hobby winemaker, garagiste, working out of my garage on a very difficult sloped driveway. And this was the first Barbera that we made. And we was really myself and my kids and a few friend helpers. And then I'd entered it into a competition, and I couldn't believe it when the results came out. I couldn't find my wine. I thought it was like lost and they had misplaced it and they didn't judge it. And so I was about to leave, the show, and I said, I'll take one last look around the bend. And I went around the bend, and it was a glass display, and it had this 2013 Barbera. It was best of show. Wow. And I was up against all sorts of, Napa and Sonoma winemakers and such. And so I was just like, okay, I think I can make good wine. This was only like the second year that I had really made it. And I decided at that point that I would, continue into this area with a much more sort of determined way. So I took classes, I was mentored with some great winemakers. And then it culminated in really, getting to where we are today, which is we have a tasting room, we have a full winery production facility, we do 20 different wines here at La Mesa, some very complex ones like our port and our sparkling and our white Barbera that we have. So this wine was just, for me, it not only tasted fantastic despite, with 10 years of aging, but it was just all the memories of how I had gotten into this business from the start. So
because wine is something that is so connected with memory. The best wine is usually connected with a very good memory.
Yeah, like you'll remember where you bought it or what you were doing at the time, and it kind of all comes back to you so back then it was small production, small little crusher, small little press, operating with just a couple of barrels. It was a lot of work for a small amount of wine, and I was just so happy that I found like a few bottles of this wine sitting there, and I was able to share it with this dinner that we had, which is pretty special, something that I had done a lot of work to prepare for. I learned how to make sourdough bread just for this winemaker dinner. So over a month, I made probably 5-6 batches of sourdough with walnut and blue cheese, walnuts from our estate, and it was really well. Anyway, part of the meal.
No, I feel like we're gonna have to have a bread maker off between you and our friend Larry Schaefer from Tercero, because he has sort of held the title of master winemaking bread maker, or bread making winemaker, I guess it would be. So we may have a new challenger for that title.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to make bread, and of course it goes really well with wine. So
absolutely. And you said you make 20 different wines now?
We do, yeah. So I started off at the very beginning making Primitivo, which was what was on the estate when we bought it. And that's what we're having tonight. We're having our Rosé and our Primitivo 19. And I swapped Primitivo with another winemaker up here named Kirk, who had Barbera. So I loved to make at least 2 wines. And then it evolved to 19 or 20 in 2020. When I brought a very experienced winemaker on board, Antonia is her name, and she hailed out of really great places in Napa, and took my winery to sort of a whole new level, and my knowledge of winemaking to a sort of a PhD level. So yeah, we do a bunch of different Italian varietals, Primitivo, Barbera. We do a bunch of Rhones. We do Grenache, Mourvèdre, Syrah, Roussanne, Viognier. We do some blends with those. We're having one of those tonight, Soleil, which is Viognier and Roussanne. And we do a beautiful GSM called Tierra. And then we do some, kind of specialty things, like we do sparkling rosé. We also make a Muscat and a Chardonnay from grapes a little bit higher altitude in El Dorado County next to us. And so you can see this kind of a very versatile, growing condition up here. We just can make so many different things with fantastic grapes, growing really well in this terroir up here in this microclimate.
Yeah, go ahead, Allison.
Sorry, you said you brought a winemaker on in what year?
2019. So out of my garage, we made the first several batches of different things that kind of ramped things up. And then Antonia said, we cannot operate this way again next year. So by the next year, we had moved to a building that we expanded and got some bigger equipment. I went shopping for a press with Antonia at the
well, no wonder you were making 2 wines. You bring her on, she makes you grow, and now you're making 20.
And the idea behind 20, I mean, it's a lot of work because they're all small batches, anywhere from like 25 to like a couple of 100 cases. But the idea that we had was our tasting room is really targeted at younger wine tasters, so that they could develop their own palate, like figure out what they liked and didn't like. So if they come to our place, we kind of have our standard tasting menu, but if they like a particular direction, then we can take them in that direction. So we have a whole category of like bright wines, we have a whole category of bold wines, and they can figure out what they like. So if they've never had like a Mourvèdre, for example, they can come in and try one, and they just love to explore, and that that's great. I mean, we have a great sort of experience at our tasting room. It's a beautiful location. We often have live music, and they just love to be able to try different things. So whereas some wineries you might go as a young taster and just kind of be shunned by the team, it's like, you don't know what you like, you should know by now. And no, I mean, as I know as myself, as a young wine starter, I needed to try a bunch of different things before I figured out what I liked and what I didn't like. So that's why we do so many wines. It's just part of our strategy of being a little bit different than our neighbors.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you brought Antonia on in 2019. When did you purchase your current estate?
So that was 2011.
Okay.
And we sort of, originally it was a search for a vacation home up in the Sierras. We didn't want to be at Tahoe because of all the snow, but we wanted to be close enough to be able to get to Tahoe. So we're an hour away from Kirkwood and Sierra Tahoe, where we are in the Shenandoah Valley. It's just due east of Sacramento, about 45 minutes. And we were never intending to get a vineyard property, but it just so happened this was such a special opportunity that the realtor convinced me it wouldn't be any work. We could just hire somebody to take care of the grapes and farm them out and sell them to other wineries. But that was no fun. I mean, you really had to start making wine and appreciating it, what we'd stumbled into here. So 2011 was the purchase, and then 2012 was really the first wine that I made. 2013 was the Barbera that I so love. And since then, it's taken 10 years, really, because we planted a whole nother section of vines, 6 acres, 4 different varieties growing there. We have Grenache, Barbera, Viognier, Petit Syrah, and then all the different buildings and facilities. We built our tasting room in 2020, several winery buildings, and then a whole bunch of solar projects. Our property entirely is sustainable with solar running 100%.
How big is this property?
It's not large. It's like 25 acres. We have 11 in grapes and 3 in legacy walnuts, these beautiful 75-year-old trees that produce franquettes, which are super rare in the US now. And then various buildings taking up space. And there's one little, kind of a 3-acre section of a bowl that I have left that's undeveloped. And I'm thinking about some different grapes over there. So,
Yeah.
You said you added 6 acres, so that's it was 5 acres were already planted when you arrived.
5 of Primitivo, and then those were planted in 2000, so they're about 22 years old, 23 years old now. And then 6 acres of the new was just a green field. So, literally bulldozer plowing it, making terraces, putting in trellises, selecting clones, really complex decisions there. And then, realizing that I liked winemaking a lot and loved the idea of having a tasting room and getting into this more full time. And that's sort of where, over 10 years have ended up.
Yeah.
You planted the Primitivo.
So the previous owner planted it. So it was the whole property up here. There are a lot of walnut farms. That was the big thing, farming up here. And there's also some really old Zinfandel vineyards that date back to the gold rush. Because this whole area up where we are was gold country. Like serious strikes nearby. And we even have a mine shaft in one of our hills on the property that has a rail in it, and you can, they were digging pretty extensively for gold. So the miners, they brought vines and they planted them, and the oldest vineyard in California is just down the road on Steiner. It's called the Grand-Père Zinfandel. It is 1849, and wow. It's still producing, and there are like 4 wineries that they have a claim, a sort of an allocation on it. It gets split up, a very little allocation. And these vineyards are all over. Literally across the street from me, up the hill, is another one with 125-year-old Zinfandel. And there's some very, very old Sangiovese and early Syrah plantings. So it's neat to discover. So that's sort of, we ended up here, just totally for reasons that we're not looking for a vineyard, but because of the location, the terroir, the growing area that we're in with the beautiful Sierras all around us. You get this kind of warm Central Valley air, and then cool. The winds literally reverse at night, and then you get the cool air from the Sierras coming down. We're at 2000 here, so it's a little below the snow line. And that makes for a fantastic growing area for a whole bunch of different varieties of grapes.
I've got notes on like a dozen things to follow up on with you from just that short little thing we talked about, including the white Barbera. But for those that are partaking, we are starting with the Soleil, so that's what we're going to be drinking first here. Although I have to say, Sandy and Larry jumped the gun a bit, and they believe they're already declaring that the Primitivo Rosé is, and I quote, freaking fantastic. So that's a positive, and we'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to kind of rewind a little bit, or reverse like the winds do up there, and get into but thank you, Allison. I appreciate that. I need a rim shot, don't I? I want to get into your background and how you came to buy a vineyard property in 2011. Was the wine business something that you had always wanted to get into? Did you have experience in it? I know, from your name and your accent, you were French Canadian originally. So how does someone from Canada like find their way into California and into the wine industry?
Yeah, great question. So I have a long lineage going back to France, 11 generations in Quebec, and many, many farmers doing all sorts of different things. I have an uncle right now who's in maple syrup. I have another one who's a huge broccoli producer, another one that does soy, organic pumpkin seeds. And so we have very diverse farming kind of genes in us. And I always, enjoyed going to the farm as a youngster. Like my parents, that would be their big trip for the weekend. We'd go see relatives and hang out and the expanse of the land and basically planting something and having it. So that transpired into a love of gardening. And I just loved, I have an amazing vegetable and fruit garden and produce all sorts of different things. I love peppers, in particular hot peppers, like really hot peppers, and
Very
tomatoes.
un-Canadian of you.
And yeah, so we just love to cook in French Canada, and so the genesis for me was I just love my go-to place for wine tasting originally was in Sonoma. And I kind of made my way into California. I was a tech entrepreneur and I did some crazy ventures and different things, but eventually made my way to California about 22 years ago. And I love to go to Sonoma because it was off the beaten path at that time. You could meet the owners, you could meet the winemakers. It was an intimate experience, kind of tasting wine and discovering. And things, of course, changed a lot in Sonoma. Became sort of Napa 2.0. But I always had that love of like, I always thought the wine tasting experience needed to be connected to the owner, to this love of the land, to really making some special wines, and also a bit of innovation, like adopting kind of not just the traditional way of winemaking, but maybe improving by, from my tech background, just improving on things. So we just loved getting away to the Sierras, and this area was just happened to be on a path to a family camp that we went to with our kids every summer. And we'd drive through this area and be like, man, there's like vineyards everywhere up here. We know nothing about this region, Amador County. What is this? So we stopped and we tried some of the wines one day, and it's a good growing area when you can go to 4 or 5 wineries and all their wines are outstanding. It's like, it's not hit and miss. It's like consistently good. So we're like, this area is just so interesting, and it's close to the, recreation. We got skiing, we've got boating, we've got, horseback riding, and we can taste wine. It'd be great. And it's kind of undiscovered. It's like an adventure. Nobody knows about this area. So, so that was the genesis of eventually learning about this place, and then realizing that we wanted to be able to escape the Bay Area and come up here for our weekends and holidays and long weekends and things like that. And again, we were not looking for a vineyard. We were looking just for a place to get away to and have a nice vacation home. But it was just too interesting, this opportunity with the Primitivo planted and kind of things set in initial motion. So the previous owner's strategy was just to sell all the crop and never made wine from it himself. But we had this special friend up here who convinced us to make wine right away and just appreciate what we had stumbled into. So that's sort of how we got into this area, and I just love the fact that it's close to Sacramento, one of the biggest metro, fastest growing metro areas in the U.S. 2.3 million people. We're 45 minutes out, and we got the Sierras. We got the cool nights. The winters there's no snow, so we can get it's like maybe 50 degrees. We can get out and do things. And the property was big enough that we could do everything we wanted to in terms of building a winery, planting more grapes, and of course making wine. So So it was never a planned thing. It was always just sort of a passion around wine, a passion for the region. And I just love to learn, new things. So I'm always trying to learn the next, what's the next best thing,
Yeah.
farming wise, winemaking wise, and also the business of selling wine. Like how do you kind of marry all those three? So
Very, very different skill sets for all of those
oh
things.
yeah. You often find people who are good in one area and not the other. Like they'll be a
Oh.
really good winemaker, but they're not good on the business side to sell the wine. And
I can give you a list of names if I need to.
yeah, so I find myself kind of dabbling in all three. And I never thought I would get into the farming side of things, but that's a whole other area where there's an incredible advantage in having your control over the entire, from soil to grape to wine, chain, and being able to farm, in unique and different ways that entice the flavors to come out of the grapes and all of that. I'll give you a good example. So, like we have a vineyard manager who his sole job is to take care of this property. He personally prunes 8,000 vines every year. He
Wow.
does it. It takes him about 6 weeks, and that makes a huge difference in just the kind of cluster production. But in the last month, we've had so much rain up here, the canopies have been out of control, and heavy canopies are not good for sort of ripe grapes. You want sun exposure, you want wind to go through to minimize risks of powdery mildew and things like that. So we're one of the only vineyards up here that has invested the time to trim the canopies kind of Napa style. I mean, they're like solid straight hedgerows. I look at my vines, I see my grapes already going through coloration right now, a little bit earlier than my neighbors. And we're trying to coax the ripeness, the even ripeness out of them. So little things like that, like where you invest extra time and care into the vines, make a huge difference in the quality of the product downstream. So if you just leave them to, like my neighbor across the road, he's got vines, he pruned them and he didn't do a single bit of trimmings. It's just like this massive canopy.
Still got the California sprawl, as they call it.
Exactly. So, he doesn't care and he'll sell them to whoever down the road. But we pay a little more attention to trying to make and I never thought, I'd get into farming. So having my own tractor and my own all these implements that I thought I could, do without, but they're critical to managing it yourself. So
well, clearly you've got a green thumb, so it's and as you said, it's in your blood and your family lineage. So gardening is clearly something that you took to. I want to talk a little bit about the varietals, but before we do that, particularly with the Soleil, I do want to ask, being up in the Sierra Foothills, where are you seeing most of your consumer and commercial traffic coming from? Is it Sacramento locals? Is it people from the Bay Area who are kind of burned out on Napa and Sonoma? Is it out of staters? Is it people coming from Tahoe? Like who are you seeing coming into the area?
It's more and more, I'd say 90% Sacramento and surrounding area. There's such growth happening in like Folsom, El Dorado Hills, Roseville, Rancho Cordova. It's like a boom of housing that's going on. And that whole metro area is about 2.3 million or so people now. So they, instead of driving to Napa, which is an hour and a half, and $75 a taste now, and then I'll waive it when you buy a bottle, they'll say, hey, let's go to Amador, and it's only 45 minutes, and it's only $15 a taste, and fees waived when you buy a bottle, and the bottles are like a tenth the price of the Napa wine. So it's a great value destination, but it's also it just a better experience because again, you're connecting with small family-owned wineries and being able to chat with the winemaker, the owner. I'm often out on the patio, on a Saturday, talking to people, talking to our guests, and sharing stories. And that's rare now in Napa. So that doesn't exist probably in Napa, but maybe a little bit in Sonoma. And so 90% from there, maybe 10% from Nevada, actually,
Okay.
Reno, Carson City, Sparks. They drive down and they'll stay a couple days and they'll hit a bunch of wineries, and they often bring RVs and camp. They love this area. It's way closer to them than driving all the way down to Napa. And then, of course, there's El Dorado on the way that they could stop at. But I just think the wineries in Amador have done a better job of marketing to those areas. So we have a strong association. It's like 50 wineries are members, and they're constantly promoting. They have these big festivals that they run 3 times a year. There's the Big Crush, which is coming up in October. It's like a huge celebration of harvest. There's the Barbera Festival, which is on September 9th, which is dedicated to one of the best grapes that grow up here, the Barbera. And then in the spring is Behind the Cellar Door, which is dedicated to learning about education and how the winemaking process kind of works. So
R.I.P. Maryland Chambers.
Between those 3, they attract a lot of people, and people get to discover. So I would say, well, maybe that's 100%, but there's a small amount of locals, some Bay Area, a little bit of Stockton. But for the most part, it's just so easy to get to here from Sacramento. So
yeah,
even from the Bay Area, it's like a 2-hour, 20-minute drive. It's not too bad.
Yeah, I was going to ask if the trade association is making more of a push to try to get folks from the Bay Area. I know here in Paso, especially over the last like 5 or 6 years, even pre-COVID, originally Paso was 90%, from Bakersfield and south. Yeah. And I would say now it's about 55-45 North County or, North Coast people, Bay Area that we're starting to see coming down here, because I think Napa, like you were saying, Napa and Sonoma has sort of priced themselves out of a lot of the people there. So I'm just wondering if the Sierra Foothills has started to see some of that movement, or if you guys are making a big push to start to get that.
Yeah, there's we're definitely seeing it. I'm in 10 years of being here, the traffic is much heavier than it was. There are now 50 plus wineries in Amador. When I first got here, there might have been 15. So there's a lot of growth, a lot of more people coming, but it's still kind of discovery land. It's not overcrowded. It's a little challenging to get lodging out here. Like Amador is much more of a farming oriented county. Yeah. And so they haven't really allowed like the big, Marriotts and Sheratons of the world to set up resorts. Right. So you have to hunt a bit more for like cool Airbnbs and little bed and breakfasts and things like that. But it's possible to have a fantastic stay over a long weekend. And there's some really nice, even high-end options if you wanted to. Sometimes people have corporate retreats here. They bring their, they have weddings, and so there's more of a push to do that. One example is, we were very restricted on food service at wineries. So you can't just taste wine, all day and not have any food. So the past couple of years, I've worked hard to get a permit to do our own bistro, and basically got it. And over the past, since we launched it in April, it's a really nice extra facility that helps pair and emphasize it's not just get burgers and fries. It's like, we'll do tri-tip sliders, or we'll do special whipped feta, which people are saying is like, it's like crack. It's amazing. But it pairs with we pair it with our certain wines. And so the whole thing is around like encouraging the ag part of things, which is the wine production, wine sales. So that's worked out quite well. So there's more stuff happening in the hospitality area, not just wine.
Do you have a poutine on the menu or a smoked meat sandwich?
Well, I wish, but no, we are not offering that. If you want that, you'll have to go.
Chris, you have to remember that Paso and San Ynez are also on their way of pricing people out, and people will go other routes. And accommodations are a huge issue.
Yeah, they really are.
But Paso has marketing money, more than other regions. And you have to remember, a lot of the smaller regions don't have marketing dollars to do pushes. So it is more word of mouth. It is more people looking for things off the beaten path or trying a wine and then seeking it out. Because some of these smaller, lesser known, lesser visited regions, Amador, Mendocino, things like that, they don't Anderson Valley, they're not coming with a budget to market.
No, it's true, but you can look at like what Lodi has done, and not to get off on a tangent here, but I think Lodi is a trade association, and you can make the argument that there is some money behind that because
There
of
is.
the bigger producers.
There is lots of money. If they can afford a full-time PR agency, there's money.
All right. Well, all I have to say is if anybody's going up to Amador County, Rest Hotel in downtown Plymouth is wonderful, and it has my full endorsement as an adorable little boutique hotel to stay at. So I highly recommend calling up Tracy there and staying. She's not paying me in any way for this. I just was enchanted.
That's a great place. Right next to it's like it was a Michelin star chef who left San Francisco to start her husband to start Taste, which is a 5-star restaurant right in downtown Plymouth.
I would have eaten there if they were open on Wednesdays, but sadly they were not. So we actually ate at a great place in Sutter Creek called Element, which had just opened or reopened, but was phenomenal as well. So hit me up for all of your Amador County Sierra Foothills recs. I can pass those on. So let's talk about the Soleil. So you mentioned you've got, it sounds like about 11 total acres planted on the 25-acre property. Am I correct in that?
That's right. Yeah.
Most of that is Primitivo, but you're doing 20 different wines. So how many do you have planted? How many different grapes do you have planted on the property? Where are you sourcing the others from? Is it, local vineyards that you have relationships with?
Yeah, so we have 9 growing now. Some of the Primitivo was grafted over to 4 other varieties that we carefully, experimented with, tried, decided on clones, and then grafted in 2020. So 5 acres of one particular grape, Primitivo is a lot for a small tasting room. It's like 2,000 cases you can make with that. So we needed to diversify, and so
did he freeze up or
did anyone else? Oh no, everyone else is moving. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I was worried too. All right. Hopefully we'll get Comb back. It's a very introspective face he's making. So
most people get really bad pictures like when that happens.
That's true. You get your mouth like wide open, like okay, while we're waiting for him to come back on.
While we're waiting, I'm going to tell everyone to save October 24th in their calendars, because I'm going to be doing a Madeira event in person in LA, and there will be a big consumer event at night, and you all need to come.
Okay, good. We'll get him back in here in a second, it looks like. Yes, very cool. So where in LA is that going to be? Do you have a venue?
In Beverly Hills at the Mayborn Hotel. So it's central for people coming from different areas of LA, and hopefully not too far off freeways for those coming from outside of LA.
Nice. And you were just on the East Coast and the Midwest doing some events.
Don't stay at the Mayborn, but if you do need to stay overnight, there are some very affordable hotels on the outskirts of Beverly Hills and beyond.
Got it.
I'm just trying to fill time while we wait for.
Yep, and here he is. You did a great job. All right.
Poor Matt and Carrie and friend still in the dark.
Yes. Welcome back, Comb. No, that's all right.
Good thing I have a backup internet provider.
I'm going to say the irony of a tech entrepreneur. Freezing up.
So well, up here it's all microwave connections. So normally they have excellent service when I'm on. But anyway, I have a backup, which is nice. So I was talking about Viognier being one of my favorite whites, just a more robust, bolder white, amazing, notes of peach and apricot, sometimes honeysuckle. The nose is just a floral explosion. I call it spring in a bottle. And I also I worked with Roussanne up here, which is also a really great grower at this altitude. And Roussanne, I find it's kind of a notch up on Chardonnay. That's how I describe it. It's kind of a softer, maybe less floral, but real big body, nice, long finish, nice soft wine. So as we were we do offer a Viognier and a Roussanne sort of separately in our tasting room. But Antonia and I thought it would be interesting to do a blend of these two. And every year it's a little bit different, the ratio. This 2022 was a little more Roussanne, 60%. And we called it Soleil because it's like having basically two sunshines in a bottle. You have summer sunshine, spring sunshine, which is the Viognier, this kind of explosion of aromas. But you also have the winter sunshine, which I'd call the Roussanne. It's a much more softer kind of sun, nice long finish. So this one does really well with the combination of just kind of the elements of the nose of the Viognier and the finish of the Roussanne for food pairing in particular.
I actually agree with you, not just about food pairing, but I think when you talk about liking the bigger style Viognier and the voluptuousness of the nose,
yeah.
Fortunately, so many of those beautiful aromatic Viogniers lack acidity on the palate, and the Roussanne just keeps this wine. You get the richness and fruit and floral, but then you have this beautiful, full mouth acidity that makes the wine linger and bright and fresh. It's really.
Yeah. So I was thrilled to learn that, I sampled some Viognier up our way at, anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 feet altitude. I was thrilled to learn that it grows really well. And so we put in a whole acre of it, which typically, the yields are quite high for a white. Normal yields would be maybe 2 or 3 tons an acre. Well, we actually get 4 to 5 tons an acre because of the soil that we have and the rootstock that we planted. So this special rootstock, it's called 110R, is a deep going root. It can go up to 20 feet down when it's mature. So it's tapping the moisture in the Sierras, and we get a ton of rain up here. Normal season we'll get 35 inches because it just dumps coming from the Central Valley. And so we get adequate rain. Normal season, we get the last 3 years have been maybe about 50% of normal, 60%. But this winter was nearly 200%. So the vines go deep, they tap the moisture way down. You almost can dry farm them entirely. Like we just irrigated for the first time this week, nothing up to now. And I might have even pushed it even more, but it's because I have some small vines kind of intermixed with the big ones. Sometimes you have gopher damage and things like that. So the Viognier does exceptionally well with this granitic kind of soil. We have a lot of red, really deep red, a volcanic kind of soil. And it was also an ancient riverbed of some sorts in the glacial days, because there's actually fossilized shells in some of the rocks at the top where the Viognier grows. So when I experimented with the Roussanne, with the other vineyard I used to buy it from, I didn't like how they farmed it. They just, didn't pay attention to things. Things were, canopies were overgrown, deer were eating the vines, and all these problems. So I decided to graft over some of our Primitivo to it. And amazingly, if you know about grafting, you can take the bud from another vine, like a little tiny bud, you chop off the top of your existing vine with all of its root structure. It's kind of scary because you could lose it. And you notch this little bud in the side of it, and all the energy from that vine underneath pushes into this tiny bud and makes it explode like it's growing at 2 feet a week. You have to keep tying and tying and tying all summer. And by the next season, you've actually got a whole different variety growing. So it's really cool to see that, so we grafted Roussanne onto some of the Primitivo stock. We also did Gamay, which is the only Gamay in Amador County.
Yes, which we will be enjoying.
We'll taste that. And we did Syrah and Mourvedre, which I was tired of searching for that in the Sierras. Like there were particular clones that I wanted to have. Syrah, I love the French clone. It's 877. It originates from Tablas Creek, and it's a great food pairing Syrah, the French kind, versus the Shiraz kind, which originated in Iran, is mostly planted in Australia, is a very bold, in your face, kind of huge wine that you probably would have one glass of and be tired of. So I was really pleased to see the Roussanne take off, and we're a little higher up than the previous vineyard that we used to grow it at. So that's one way of diversifying, is grafting. Literally in one season, you can go from your whatever you've got to something like
five or six different varieties.
things. So we did 4 in that case,
Wow.
on top of the 4 that we had planted, which took, it's a lot longer to bring a vineyard up from scratch. You're talking at least 5 years to get to production. Then you got to make your first wine, you got to let it age. So you're out about 7 or 8 years before you're actually earning any income off selling that wine. So the other couple of vineyards or 3 vineyards that we get some other varieties from, one is Muscat Canelli, which I do a dry style Muscat, not a dessert one. And that's got this amazing aromatics, kind of similar to Viognier, but just, again, it's kind of like Soleil. It's a little bit of a softer wine. And Chardonnay, believe it or not, one of the best Chardonnays I've ever had was made by a winery up here, and I was able to track down where they got their fruit from. So it comes from a vineyard called Spanish Creek, which is at 2,800 altitude, almost at the snow line. So sometimes they get a frost and everything's like last year, everything was wiped out.
Yeah. Wow.
This year looks good. I'm going to make a big batch to make up for it. But people love Chardonnay, and we do a Chablis style with no oak, and they love it. And so I'm happy to source from this other vineyard. They do a good job of farming it for there. And the third one we get is Zinfandel. So believe it or not, we're in the land of Zin. We don't have any Zin on our property because everybody has Zin up here.
You've got Primitivo. You don't want to get the two.
I have Primitivo. It's a little bit of a softer grape than dry farm Zin. And I kept getting asked, like, when are you guys going to offer a big, bold, knock me on my back Zinfandel? And I'm like, well, if you want that, let me give you 5 others immediately around us that could satisfy. But they're like, no, but we want it from you with your style. And so I was like, okay, finally I broke down last year. So our Zin, we get some from El Dorado nearby. It's a beautiful vineyard that a good mentor friend I know. And we also get some from Redwood Valley up in Mendocino, way out there. And they had Antonia's, our winemaker's connections from her old days at Banshee in Sonoma. She used to source from them. So they're a fantastic source for us for great Zin.
So how do you and let me just ask one more question and then we'll move on to the rosé. But how do you and Antonia decide which barrels to use in the Soleil blend versus which ones to make individually? How do you decide on the quantities and the quality of those?
So we usually go through kind of an exercise right about now of planning our production. Well, it's actually even earlier because I've got to figure out, we don't use all the grapes on our property, so we do sell some to many other winemakers, as people that come as far away as Arizona to pick up our Gamay. Fellow drives 12 hours each way.
Wow. I
have a winery in Oregon coming to get some Primitivo this year. It's like also an 11-hour drive. I have Napa wineries picking up our Viognier and our Roussanne. So it's all over the map. But I decide early on, like, okay, I look at inventories and I kind of figure out where are we. And you're looking 2 years ahead at least for the reds. So you got to be careful. Like if it's a bad year, this year is kind of a difficult year in the wine business. Visitation is down. But you're making wine for 2 years from now. So if you underproduce, you could be in trouble in 2 years when things kind of come back. So we go through that. And then we also think about anything innovative that we want to do. So a good example of that was a few years ago, I had stumbled upon a white Barbera from another winery, and they'd taken a best of class in the San Francisco Chronicle competition. Like, what is this? So I bought a couple of bottles. I gave one to Antonia, and I said, help me reverse engineer how they did this. Because this is interesting. It's a completely white wine made from a very red grape.
Yeah.
And she was able to kind of describe how she would do it. We could do it in small scale, but we could never do it with our big press. So finally, after 2 years of experimenting with different cycles, we were able to make it at large scale. And it's probably our top selling white wine in the tasting room. But we decide, are we going to do anything special? So white Barbera or port or sparkling, these are all new for me. So I was like, oh, cool. Let's try something new this year. Maybe we'll do a Pet Nat next, a Pétillant Naturel, and do a Muscat with that. That would be interesting. So anyway, we come up with that, and then as we make the wine, so we have adopted a very innovative new technology. Is a company that's been probably around for 20 years, making these special tanks. They're called flex tanks, and they are a patented polymer that allows oxygen through the material to age the wine just like a barrel.
Right.
So you have this perfectly clean vessel that you can age wine just like barrels can, without the complexity of having to top them off constantly with the angel share that gets evaporated, and clean them. It's really hard to clean barrels if you're a small winery and don't have huge equipment to completely sanitize them. So what do you do when you're using barrels as a small winery? You add a ton of sulfites into the wine to kill any bacteria in there. Well, these tanks allow us to do 60 to 70% less sulfites than barrels would, because they're sealed, because they're so clean. So the number one thing that people tell us about our wines, A, they're very consistent across all of the different makes that we do. 2, they never get a headache. And 3, they just never have any sort of reaction to the sulfites. So I'm really proud that we've adopted something new that is kind of cutting edge, and I think really helps improve the product at the end of the day. So we'll make decisions as the season kind of ends and we get into aging and all of that, about what blends, how we're going to blend things together. We do these bench trials, and also oak infusion. Like, people often ask us, well, you're not using oak barrels, how do you infuse it? Well, the number one byproduct of making oak barrels is basically oak chips, staves, chips, whatever. They're toasted exactly the same as barrels are. And they're very sustainable as a result, because you're reusing product in the production. And so our wines tend to be light oak infusion. We'll only do a few heavy ones. Of the 4 you're tasting here, none of them have oak in it.
Nice.
So you're tasting the pure varietal in a fruit forward style. That's not to say that we don't have wines with oak. We have a beautiful Petite Syrah that has about a 50% French oak equivalent in it. We have a 2020 Primitivo that has a little bit more oak. It just depends on the season and what we taste. And the advantage of this technology is that we can infuse oak in a very precise way in a short time, and be able to adjust course tasting it. So I was kind of geeking out on this technology, but I have to say,
and it gives you a lot of control. It sounds like it gives you and Antonio a lot of control over the winemaking, which I want to move on to the rosé. Before we do that, Carrie and Matt, our resident chefs here, we always like to ask what to pair with each wine. They went with a lemon thyme goat cheese crostini with peach and aged balsamic white vinegar, which sounds absolutely stunning and delicious. So I don't know if you just very quickly have any great pairings to go with the Soleil comb, but
I love moule marinière, mussels, with the fries that are kind of next to it.
The frite.
Delicious, crisp summer salads, like a perfect wine for that. You can do even fruit salads. So I paired this with, I had garden fresh organic greens. I had a couple of different fruit trees that were producing. One was a snow white peach, and the other was a Japanese shiro plum. It's like a yellow plum, and they're both like sugar bombs. So I had these fruit in the salad with a little bit of balsamic glaze, and we were serving that with Soleil. It was fantastic.
I mean, judging by the photo you've got up there, Matt, I think we can see how satisfied you are from your face right there from the photo. It's probably a good avatar for you. So let's move on to the Primitivo Rosé. So this is some of that originally planted Primitivo from the vineyard. From your state vineyard, are you doing Saugny style with this, or are you taking certain blocks of the Primitivo and producing them specifically for rosé with your pruning, with your farming and harvesting it early?
So Chris, not necessarily nothing changes on the farming side, but it's more of when we harvest it. So we want a lighter, more acidic, kind of crisper wine. So we'll typically pick it like 2 weeks before we would normally pick the red Primitivo. And so it's not as intensely red when we pick it. It's typically about 22% sugar, pH, 3.2 instead of 3.6 when the red's ready. So it's earlier. And then what we do is we have a special press. It's actually one of the key advantages of making our white Barbera, actually. That is a special bladder press from Italy. It's made by Della Toffola. It's the only company that makes this kind of press. And people were laughing at me when I was at the show, buying it. Why are you buying this one? This is the only company that makes this. I'm like, this is exactly when I was a small winemaker. I had a water bladder press, and it's a cylinder that has holes all around it. So when the grapes are pressed, there's a balloon that blows up, and it's a very gentle press as a result. There's fewer cycles, fewer hitting the seeds, and potentially introducing tannins into the wine. So it's a real beautiful advantage press for the kind of style that we want to make. And so typically, the beginning of that press cycle, it's whole cluster. We just throw everything in, stems, grapes, all. And this press cycle goes about 90 minutes, and within the first half hour, the juice coming out's white, so we could actually make a white Primitivo. But then about 45, 60 minutes into it, it comes out very red, so it kind of offsets it. And this particular style we did Provence, so it's more of a lighter kind of orangey red. It's hard sometimes. People prefer a true darker rosé, so we might blend in just a little bit of Primitivo red wine into it at the very end, if we want to do that. But I like it like this, so I find it's a very beautiful, again, another great food pairing wine. It just goes with so many different things. If you want something cold with chicken, even with beef, tomato sauces, Primitivo is known for that kind of pairing. And it's like a go-to at our tasting room. People, buy it by the case for summertime. It's very enjoyable on its own, and it just has this kind of you might detect a bit of plum in it, some apple, maybe vanilla, but it is pure, no oak rosé and rosé style. And so that's how we make it. We ferment in these special egg-shaped tanks, which I really like a lot. So that it kind of the gases as they go, they rotate through and stir up all the solids in the wine, and that extracts all the flavors out of the solids, which is great. So I do believe that technique, using those special tanks, really helps. It kind of does a slow fermentation, stirs it all the time, and gets the flavors completely out of the wine, which is great.
Yeah, very interesting. So this is, in essence, you're taking the grapes, there's no maceration process. You're pressing this straight off. So in theory, this is a white Primitivo that, just because of the cycling of this press, will pull off some red juice, because after 45 minutes, you have that skin contact from the juice that's being extracted towards the end of the cycle. That's really interesting, such kind of a non-traditional way to make a rosé.
Yeah, we used to, in our early days, it's like sort of my garagiste days, we used to crush the grapes. And so we'd run them through a destemmer crusher, and then quick as we could process them into this little press, press them out. And so the wine was always darker rosé from that exercise. But I feel that this method where we extract really truly the juice inside, just a little bit of color from the skins coming more at the end, and the way we ferment it in these egg-shaped tanks really helps extract what's left of the flavors that are in the solids from the inside juice, inside of the grape. I think it does a better job. And so this has been, I've been producing this rosé since 2013, and this sort of it's just a favorite. And I love, so the real innovation came recently. We decided to take this same juice and make it into a sparkling rosé.
Oh, okay.
And that was a lot of fun. I'd never worked with sparkling before, but you need a whole other different set of equipment to make a sparkling.
Yes.
It involves secondary fermentation. So they actually drop in a little bit of sugar material with a second yeast and they cap it. And then that's what kind of makes the bubbles inside. There's a whole cool process of like rotating the bottles.
We're familiar with the riddling, the
yeah,
task of riddling. So you're doing the entire method traditional style in-house. You're not just taking the juice out to rack and riddle or one of the third party.
Yeah, we take our juice to a group called LVVR out in Lodi.
Okay.
And, they work with almost every winery up here, but they do small batches. And what I love is that it's our juice. It's not Weibel's, juice, whatever.
Right.
And they work with our wine, and they do a fantastic job. So because they have the special equipment, they can do all the riddling, they can do the disgorging, the dosage tests, and the capping, and all of that. So
I can't let you badmouth Weibel too badly because they're taking my juice this year and turning it into my own sparkling brand. So,
okay, so that's something new. They had talked to me about that and said that they were the year I talked to them a couple of years ago. They were like, no, we don't take others, but I think they've kind of come around to. Yeah,
we're doing Charmat style, so tank fermented rather than the method traditional in bottle fermentation.
Nice.
That's a whole other discussion. Sandy, again, in addition to this being freaking fantastic, Sandy and Larry love the delicacy of the rosé, and I have to agree. I think the acidity and the brightness of this is what's really makes it so. I mean, there's a mouth-wateringness to this because of that higher acidity. Putting it at like a 3.1, 3.2 pH definitely adds that. I get almost some like ripe tomato notes off of this. Just a little bit of that kind of sweet, but just a hint of that kind of vegetal herbaceousness to it. But it's so unique. I think this is one of those rosés, if you put it in front of somebody, they'd be hard pressed to kind of pick out the variety for this because it's not your typical Grenache, your Pinot, your Mourvedre style rosé on this.
I think it's a really food friendly rosé. It's, it probably is better with food than even sipping it on its own because it's got texture. It wants something with it.
Yeah, there's a creaminess to it, which really kind of sets across the palate, which is quite nice.
It really is like, because, there are a lot of rosés out there that have all the kind of bright, fun, fresh, but they're not really food friendly. They're just sort of sippers. They're poolside sippers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this, I think this cries out for food. So I want to know, Matt, Carrie, and friends in the dark, what did you pair with this? Because I'm really curious, because it's making me really hungry.
And Combe, what would you pair with this?
I love having this with some bolder kind of dishes. So I don't perhaps go all the way to steak, but I certainly go with like a chicken. I go with pasta, for example. If it's a hot day and I'll be eating, outside, then I'll want to have a chilled rosé to go with whatever I'm eating. So I think it goes great with, especially with cheeses. If you pair it with like a Manchego or a Trader Joe's pepper Toscano, one of my favorite cheeses, and then a traditional charcuterie plate, and then you could even have it with a dessert. So you could have a fruit bowl, and it does really well with that too. So it's very versatile in that way.
Yeah, and Matt and Carrie paired it with an avocado orange romaine lettuce salad with a lime cumin dressing and said it wasn't the best. I can understand that. I like, to me, this doesn't, it has such a bright acidity, more of that like tart
Fight it with the
bitter
cit-
acid. Exactly. It's gonna counter, like this would not go well with orange, grapefruit, things like that. What I get a sense from with this, what I'm like immediately came to mind was like spicy charcuterie, like sobrasada, hot copa, something like that, I think would be phenomenal because that acidity can quench a little bit of heat. But that saltiness of, those pork-based charcuteries, I think would just really pair nicely with this.
I also think sort of like a goat cheese, kind of a chalky acidity could work with it.
Yeah.
More so than a citrus or bright acidity. I even get like a touch of kind of like minerality, like a salinity to it. So, I mean, even with sushi or oysters, I think that this could work.
I could see that. And I mean, Com, I loved your idea of like a cold sliced London broil or a flank steak, like even with a little bit of marinade. And Mike and Jeannie, as our resident vegans, I would say you could even grill or marinate and grill some portobello mushrooms. But then here's the thing, you put them in the refrigerator and then serve them like slightly chilled, but sliced. I think that could be really, really delicious. The earthiness of this with that acidity, there's a little bitterness on the finish, a little brininess to this wine. I think it would all really come together quite nicely.
I think the great thing when you have rosés is that, especially rosés from bolder grapes, like a Primitivo or something, is that in the summertime when you're not, or on a hot day when you're not really in the mood for a big red wine, and I don't mean big and sour, just like the boldness of a red wine with your meats. I mean, a rosé is a great replacement because it can stand up to a rosé like this can stand up to those dishes, but still give you the freshness you might want on a summer day or something.
Yep.
Yeah. I think as a nice transition, are you just going to stick with the Primitivo for rosés, or now that you've got some Syrah, some Mourvèdre on the property, the Gamay, which we will talk about next, are you thinking about potentially making some rosés with those grapes, or just all reds with those?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things I also do kind of on our property is that we store wines for other wineries here. We have some pretty big storage units that are all climatized and nice and secure. And so I get to talk to these other wineries and see what's flying out the door and what's not flying out the door. So Grenache Rosé is a possibility, but I think Grenache as a red is a much more interesting wine from a business perspective. That rosés typically are $10-15 less than a red. Why would you make, in our case we have a very interesting clone. It kind of originated down in Paso with John Albin. Albin was one of the first what's called the Rhone Rangers, and there were some people that brought Rhones to California. He was one of them. He worked at the Chateau d'As in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and rumor has it that he brought some Grenache in his suitcase from the Chateau d'As, and he called that the Albin clone, and that sort of made its way into a few years. So I was able to get my hands on this Albin clone through sort of a friendship with John Duarte of Duarte Nursery. So I have this very special clone, Châteauneuf-du-Pape Chateau d'As Grenache, is anywhere from $500 to $4,000 a bottle. And it's growing beautifully up here in our granitic soil at the very top of the hill where you have the fossilized rocks that I mentioned. And so I'm like, why would I make this into a rosé and not have the full expression of the red that's
Sure.
in it? It's a lighter red for sure, kind of more like a Pinot or even a Gamay for that matter. So what I also like doing is because I sell our grapes to a few other wineries, I get to see what they do with it. So for example, a very innovative winery here up our way called Raven's Reach, they bought our Gamay last year and they made a rosé with it. and it tastes fantastic. It's completely different than the Gamay that we make with, which is the Beaujolais style, Beaujolais Nouveau. But you know, and it tastes fantastic. But again, it's one of these things like, this is a premium grape. There isn't a lot of it. Why would you make a rosé out of that? So I just find, having made the Primitivo rosé for so many years now, gotten so much feedback on it, that it's just every year it's a winner. And I just have a lot of Primitivo still on our property, so why not use some of that to satisfy the rosé? So no plans to change. Long answer.
Got it.
But
If
it
it ain't
does
broke,
give you
don't
an
fix it.
idea of how I think about these things, just
Yeah.
kind of seeing what others are doing with our grapes, or with other innovative ways they process things.
And that's, so what's fascinating is, you know, that's the difference between the grape growing, the winemaking, and the business side. The fact that
Yeah.
you have these other businesses almost gives you, you know, your own free market research in this, so you can make decisions like that, which is a great seg into the Gamay Noir. So what kind of research did you put into deciding to plant Gamay, or excuse me, graft over to Gamay? You know, you mentioned it's the first Gamay in the Sierra Foothills that's being grown there. You know, how did you figure out that it would work in your soil and your climate conditions? Take us through that decision making.
Yeah. So, long story. I was in San Francisco at the time. I was distributing to some restaurants. I was looking for a distributor, and really hard to find, because that industry's consolidated.
Yeah, they want
I wanna
10, they want 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 cases of something. to
Yeah,
go
and they just don't want
supermarkets.
to do the work for like a small winery. And
Right.
Amador is kind of an unknown wine, so it's a little harder to sell and make people understand. But anyway, they told me, hey, have you ever checked out Gamay? It grows up your way. And they kind of planted the seed. So I was like, you know, I really like the idea of a Gamay, because it's the Beaujolais Nouveau. It's the first wine release. It's a very fruity, young, you know, kind of wine. So I went and tried to find this Gamay up in the foothills, and I actually, you know, had to look at satellite maps and knock on people's doors and say, "Is that Gamay? Are you the owner? Or do you farm it?" So finally, I found this Gamay up near Apple Hill. That's where it primarily is, and there's a farmer up there who manages most of it. I managed to connect with him, and I asked him, "Can I get half a ton to make a barrel's worth?" And he's like, "Well, sure, but you'll be numbered like 12 on the wait list behind all these Napa wineries." So the Napa wineries locked up this supply. I mean, there was no way to get. So the only way that I got any was that my winemaker Antonia happened to be walking her dog, and she lived up that way. And he was walking, Ron was his name. He was walking his dog, and they would meet up on the trail, and they kind of grew friends, you know, talking about wine and growing grapes and stuff. So at the end of a few months of that, he said, "I'll get you half a ton, don't worry." And so someone else got cut back, I guess. But so I made a batch, and so this wine is completely different than our other red wines because of the method that's used to make it. So the way it's done is you basically pick the grapes off the field and you throw them in a sealed tank with dry ice.
So it is carbonic maceration. Yeah.
Carbonic maceration.
We are very familiar with carbonic maceration, as I think
So
we've
that
had
is
about
such a cool, because it's like very little work. You actually
Yeah.
put it in, close the top, leave it for 3 weeks, and it just.
but it's also nerve-wracking, I imagine, because you
It
have to
is,
make
'cause you
sure
never know
that
if you're gonna make
fermentation
it
is
to
started.
finish. Yeah,
Exactly.
you just don't know if it's going to get to the end. But ours have been fortunate. I guess the natural yeast on the vineyard that we get it from is pretty strong and gets it there. So so over the course of a couple of years, I experimented with this half ton that he carved out for me. And I asked him in the end, "Ron, what do you think? Could I grow this on our property? Like, we're not at 2,900, 3,000 feet like they are at Apple Hill, and they always risk getting frost up there, and a lot of the crop is ruined." He said, "Well, you're east facing, you're in a cold block at the bottom. It's kind of like perfect conditions, like in France for doing it." He said, "You should try it." So I nervously, cut our 20-year-old Primitivo vines, which are, about this wide around,
Right.
and we grafted Gamay from the Premier vineyard up there to Barsodi vineyard onto these vines, and it took, and it's done extremely well. And in the first year, 2021 was the first season that we had from grafting over. We were able to produce almost 200 cases, which was like nearly 2 tons, almost 3 tons of grapes. Whereas before I had trouble buying, just half a ton.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of production of Gamay for us, but I like this grape also because I can trade it with other, wineries for some premium grapes I can get somewhere else. So,
Yep.
So it's a nice one to have in my back pocket to say, well, I can sell Gamay and then I can go buy, a couple of tons of premium Pinot grapes out in Dry Creek or something like that. So, so I think it's kind of a straightforward wine to make because of the way you just put it in a tank, put some dry ice in, let the natural yeast do its thing, and the yeast ferments the grape from within the grape. And so as a result, you get these kind of amazing aromatics. It's almost, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like candied raspberry, maybe even bubblegum.
Yeah, you hear bubblegum is a lot
Yeah.
with the Beaujolais Nouveaux, and even like when you get into the Village, some of the earlier Beaujolais there. Yeah.
And doesn't need to age. Literally, you can bottle it up 2 months after producing it. That's the whole Beaujolais Nouveau festival they have. It's the first wine released. And what I love about this is that it can be served chilled or room temp. So if you like a cold red wine, this is the perfect one. You can just put this in the fridge and bring it out on a hot day and enjoy it on its own or with food, chilled, which is how I prefer it. Or you can have it, on a cold winter's night in a nice room temperature way, and it tastes just as interesting. So this one involved a lot of research, a lot of convincing to. It's not like we could go down the street, to a nursery and buy Gamay vines.
Right.
They're just not there in California. So we had to graft, and it was a successful graft, I would say. And on a section of the vineyard that is ideally suited for this kind of a grape. So it's a very delicate grape. It looks almost like the Pinot. Very thin skin, has a tendency to, if it's not covered enough, a little bit of sunburn can happen. But that's what makes it, kind of a lighter, more kind of fruity and flavorful wine.
Yeah. And then after you do the carbonic maceration, you're putting this into the flex tanks. Are you allowing a little bit of age? This is a 21. So, what's your kind of window for drinkability for these? How long do you think you can hold on to them? Or is it pretty much intended a year, 2 years, no more than that to be drunk?
Yeah, I would say max 2 years. It's the style that it's made. And I think you just have to know that if you buy this, you want to either go the chilled route or the room temp route, and don't let it age. Just it's meant to be enjoyed right away, and that's what it is in France. It's all about the Nouveau Festival, and so just this past weekend we had a wine master class at our tasting room. Antonia led a discussion. She's also a WSET sommelier, so she was bringing that kind of rigor and methodology to a lot of our club members came for this event. And so we released our 2022 Gamay, which we just bottled up a couple of months ago, as a tasting menu item, and it's gotten even better just a year later after grafting. Because grafting, the first year you get kind of a heavier crop, might not be as concentrated flavor. The second year it's a little bit lighter crop. Third year it's kind of a normal crop, and then the flavors come out really where you want them to be. So this will be our third vintage this fall, and I'm looking forward to kind of comparing them. But back to your question, I don't think you want to age this wine. You'd want to have it right away.
All right, I have to let my my wine geek flag fly here, but do you know the reason why Beaujolais Day was created and why the Beaujolais Nouveau has become so synonymous with November?
I don't know.
So I learned this from doing some tastings in Beaujolais. So the River Saône, which is the river that connects Beaujolais to Lyon, freezes during the winter, predominantly in December. So the wine merchants in Lyon were always terrified about running out of wine during, and this is, back before, carts and easy ways, cars to transport the wine, were terrified about running out of wine during the winter months because after harvest, nobody wanted to bottle or send cast down or whatnot. Wines weren't ready to be put into bottle and shipped down. So basically, they convinced the winemakers in Beaujolais to take the Gamay, create it as quickly as possible, ship it down the river before the Saône freezes, so that they would have some wine to pour in their bistros over the course of the winter once the river froze and wine wasn't transported down there. So, but it wasn't until the 1950s and the 1960s when, oddly enough, the British there was no real Beaujolais Day, but then there were a couple of British wine merchants that decided to have the race to see who could get the first bottles, the first cases of Beaujolais Nouveau into England, and that was then promulgated by Jadot and who's the other?
George Dubouf.
Dubouf, yes, exactly. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Who basically then created this holiday and got the French government to recognize the third Thursday in November as Beaujolais Day. But the real history has to do with the freezing of the Saône River, and it ended up being the last wine of the year as opposed to the first wine as we all think of it. So, and
Yeah,
now you know the rest of the story.
That is a very fun fact, Chris.
It is a fun fact.
Unfortunately, while it may have made sense back then, it gave poor Beaujolais a very bad name in the future.
Well, the nice thing is that the Beaujolais crew have kind of taken the mantle, and among more experienced wine drinkers, they understand that there are, the 10 appellations, and Beaujolais can be
Right, you
aged
just
in.
said exactly the thing. By more experienced wine drinkers, the average person
Sure.
only Beaujolais is that Nouveau stuff you drink between Halloween and Thanksgiving.
And so this poses a question to you, Combe, which is, now that you have this stockpile of Gamay that nobody else does, you have these wonderful flex tanks that allow you to age wine, add in oak as need be. Obviously, you're doing this in the more traditional Beaujolais Nouveau style, but have you thought about doing a more age-worthy Beaujolais cru, Moulin à Vent or Fleury or Morgon style, adding in some oak, holding it back for a little bit, and maybe making a more robust version of the Gamay?
So another great question. So because I do have some extra grapes, we sell them to other wineries. So there's a fellow from Arizona, Utah. He's kind of in the mountains. He's planting Gamay out that way, and he's working on making some in the meantime. And he does a traditional red with oak. So I'll be curious we're going to try, side by side. These were the same grapes.
He'll be your guinea pig, basically.
Yeah, so I like that. And the fellow who did the rosé is going Gamay this year. So I'm always curious. I really love to even allow like home winemakers to come and pick up some of our grapes, because some of them will do 400 or 500 pounds and make an amazing small batch. That's how I started. Yeah. And so I get to try all kinds of different things with the same sort of control. I know what wine tastes like. So yeah, I'm for now, I think I prefer the Gamay in the Beaujolais Nouveau style. But if they come back and show me it's something that blows my socks off, I might switch to, try a vintage that would have something different. And
That's a very tech mindset. You never want to be the first one out there. What you want to do is be the second one who perfects the technology rather than the one who invents it, or at least makes it more consumer friendly. So Carrie Matt and their faceless friends, who are also in the dark, paired this with Coq au vin, which is impressive and makes me think of old Three's Company episodes, because that was Jack Tripper's go-to dish whenever he was cooking for a lady or at Jack's Bistro. But what say you, Combe? What food pairings would you put together with your Gamay?
Again, I think roast chicken, coq au vin, I guess, was one of my top things. Fish would be very good with this. I often pair it with salmon. I go actually on the ocean, on the Pacific, on a party boat, and I fish for salmon, and I come back usually with a good catch, and fresh, paired salmon would be great. But it will also do very well with as an appetizer wine, and just kind of serving it with a few different cheeses. We have
nice
a lot
aperitif.
Yeah,
lovely, nice. All right, let's move on to the main event, your 2019 Primitivo, your flagship grape, the one that really started everything for you, it sounds like.
Yeah. So these are the oldest vines on the estate here. Primitivo, when the previous fellow planted it, there was almost none in California. There was maybe like 600 acres when there are 300,000 acres of red.
Right.
So he had some advice from a legendary wine grower, a grape grower here, a fellow named Dick Cooper. And Dick was the pioneer of Barbera. He's kind of known as the grandfather of Barbera in Amador County. But he advised the previous owner here to plant Primitivo, something different, because he said everyone has Zin, but not many people. So even though Primitivo and Zin are the same lineage, their DNA is kind of very similar, they grow very differently. So Primitivo tends to be not as clustered and compacted together, so it gets a little more even ripening. It's a little lighter in color than Zinfandel, and it's also a little softer. And a lot of winemakers will blend Primitivo into dry farm Zin, 2 to 3%, to just tone the Zin down. So you imagine that that's what Primitivo is doing. So I call it, it's like our style of making it is like almost all of our reds, very light on the tannins. We have a special way of fermenting in tanks where the seeds and a lot of the originators of tannins float to the bottom. They're out of the way. As we drain the tanks to press them, we sun off the liquid, we leave the seeds there, and we really just press the skins. And so we put a lot of effort into also taking the stems and stalks out of the wine. They may not get fully taken out by the machine, so we actually hand pick them out. It's like a big half day's job. So I like that. I just like that emphasizes the fruit nature of this wine. And it's got it's got this amazing finish. Like a lot of people call it just dances on your tongue forever. So you drink it and it just goes on and on. 2018 was sort of the beginning of like, I'm toning back the oak in our wine. I just find the oak is overpowering. At that time, we were using American oak, which is even more overpowering than French.
Yes.
And so our older Primitivos had a lot more smoky, vanilla kind of characteristics. I find this to be a little more, plum, dried cherries, a little bit of vanilla, but a little bit of licorice too, which is kind of interesting. So I just love how, so 18 was a start, 19 we continued, no oak whatsoever. It was kind of a 100% radical change in the winemaking with Antonia, wanting to kind of honor my desire to kind of do more fruit forward kind of wines. And since then, again, it's a business issue. a lot of people are looking for oak. And so you can't just produce wines that you like. You have to produce wines that people will buy, basically. So we've kind of moved the needle a little bit more, not like we used to do, but more like 30% to 40% French oak, a little bit lighter kind of toasting as well. So 19 was the last year of pure no oak. And I think it's just aged really well. This wine will probably age for a good 10 to 15 years, even though it did not have any oak infusion into it. And this is my go-to wine for almost any food pairing thing I'll have. I pair this with steak, I pair it with chicken, I'll have it with fish, I'll have it with a medley of roasted veggies. It's just a great, because it's got such a nice acidity to it and a nice finish on the end. It just always complements food in a great way.
Yeah, I've got a flank steak that I am defrosting, and I'm going to have tomorrow do kind of a 24-hour dry age on it, and I'm going to hold on to what I have left in this bottle to pair with it, because I think that high acidity will really cut through that more fibrous note of a leaner cut like a flank steak or a London broil. I have to say, there's a leanness to this wine that even with some of the Southern Italian Primitivos I've had, it's racy. There's more of a like kind of a steeliness. It doesn't have that lushness that a lot of Primitivos have. It's very acid driven. And you mentioned the finish. To me, it almost is the opposite. Like, because of that higher acidity, to me, it kind of hits the tongue, hits the mid palate, and there's not much of a finish, but that's okay, because I'm so used to heavier Primitivos, Zinfandels, obviously, that have that length, that chocolatey toffee note that just kind of stays with you. But this really just races off the tongue and kind of disappears until your next sip. In a good way, I should say.
So yeah, this is probably our most versatile grape. Again, we use it in the rosé. We do the red with it. We make a couple of interesting blends. We do one called Primavera, which is Primitivo and Barbera. The Barbera grape is extremely acidic. It's much more like a Sangiovese, but it is a huge red. So it adds a whole other depth to the Primitivo. And we do another blend called Seta, which is silk, basically, and that's Primitivo and Petite Syrah, which we are. A lot of people love that one too. It's the Petite Syrah kind of elevates the color, the aromatics, the intensity of the wine. Just a small amount of it.
I can imagine. Nice. Yeah, this is just such a versatile wine. I can see this paired with everything from, like pork ribs, pork loin, to the beef dishes we were talking about, to like a ratatouille eggplant, like roasted eggplant would be fantastic with this. Very, very, very versatile. Even like rice dishes, I think this would be really interesting with a paella or a jambalaya of sorts, that has some interesting flavors to it. So what, as we kind of wrap up here, what does the future hold for La Mesa Vineyards? Are there more grapes that you're looking to potentially graft on? Are there other grapes in the region that you're looking to experiment with? What's, is 20 kind of going to be the number? Are there things that are going to drop out, things you're going to add?
A few things probably will drop. I mean, we've added so many different things. We didn't even talk about our port, which is our amazing dessert wine. We do a Zinfandel, Old Vine Zin Barbera blend, each done port style together. And that's a huge favorite. But ultimately, it is complex to make a lot of wines. You have to do some things to make it workable when you're bottling, for example, or when you're designing your labels, or all these different elements of the production process. I'm grappling with the idea of, it just takes so long to bring up a new vineyard, but I would love to have my own grape, control over, if I could do a Cabernet up here. So this is not a region that is, known for Cabernet, but there are some amazing wineries I could point you to that have fantastic cabs. And so depending on the orientation with the sun and the kind of soil that you have, it is possible to make a fantastic cab. So I'm noodling on the idea of, okay, well, it would take 5 years and I would have to, invest a lot to terrace the hill that we have and make it all happen. But it would also allow me to have a few others too. So Grenache Blanc is one I would love to do. A Marsanne would be one that I would love to add to our Soleil as
to pair with the Roussanne, absolutely.
style
Yep.
blend. Very hard to find up here. So
Yeah.
that's mainly the issue, is like getting the clone and being able to control the growing of it in a way that coaxes out the best flavors in that. So the future is probably either I source those from others in the meantime, just because it takes 5 years to bring something like that up, but also to just keep working. Like, we've had to pivot so many times, and we launched our tasting room in the peak of the pandemic. 2020 November, we opened for Thanksgiving weekend. The following 2 months we had to shut down because everybody was shut down up here. And it's been fits and starts since then. It's just like we can't do inside tasting, only outside tasting. But finally, some sense of normalcy has returned, and we had to pivot to a whole other way of tasting back in the day. So we used to use these because of COVID and that, we used to use these carafes. I don't know if you can see them here, but I'm going to just pop this up.
Oh,
so
yes.
We had kind of a carafe style way of tasting, and that allowed people to be efficiently served outside, go at their own pace. And so now, only recently, since the beginning of this year, have we been able to use the inside of our tasting room and taste in a traditional individual pour way, and really tell you the stories of each wine. So I'm glad that is a better experience for everybody. But there are some things from the pandemic that really will continue to be a great experience. The outside area of our tasting rooms is beautiful, shaded. We have these big shade sails up. We do live music every so often. And the views are fantastic. So, and there's always a breeze coming down. So no matter how hot it is, it's always bearable out there. And so that the pandemic made us beautify this outside space. So I think it's not just about the wines and the varieties. It really is about the overall experience. So between doing the inside tasting with such an amazing staff, I mean, I'm really pleased to say our staff have been with us for nearly 3 years. We have not had a single person turn over. So they know our wines. They've been on harvest, they've been on the back of the tractor, leafing, and they've been through bottling, and they know a lot about our wines. We have this beautiful area here. It's just at higher altitude. And so you get the trees, you get the mountains, you get the snow-capped mountains in the distance. It's kind of a fantastic view. And also other elements of the experience, such as our bistro, being able to pair some interesting foods, doing a lot with the estate walnuts and the sourdough breads and toasted walnuts and on the charcuterie boards and things like that. So my emphasis is less on, I don't particularly want to make more wines. I'd rather fine tune the experience of wine tasting to be like it was in the early days of Sonoma that got me hooked. I love the idea of, having people come, be able to talk to me. My staff is knowledgeable, and they just have a great time, and hopefully they'll take a few bottles home, pair it with food, have it with friends, and come back. I mean, that's what it's all about,
And that's quite an accomplishment, given that you're not in or around a major metropolis, to be able to draw people from, as you said, you're 45 minutes to an hour from Sacramento. That's quite a commute for somebody who wants to work in the wine industry. So having good staff that you can keep, and they're happy and satisfied and content with everything, that's quite an accomplishment. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So if folks want to come up and visit, and again, I highly recommend getting up to Amador County, the Shenandoah Valley. What is where are, I know you're kind of just on Shenandoah Road, but there is that I guess it's, you have the Sierra Foothills are an appellation, and then the Amador County is a sub-appellation, and I guess the Shenandoah Valley is a sub-appellation beyond that.
Yes.
So where does that kind of start and end?
Well, it's basically anything along Shenandoah Road. It's a historic road that runs at the bottom of kind of this valley, is in the Shenandoah AVA. So it's kind of a micro AVA, just like there's Fiddletown as well as another one next to us within Amador County. So it's the premier kind of AVA of Amador, even of the Sierra Foothills. So the Sierra Foothills encompasses like El Dorado, Amador, Calaveras, a whole bunch of counties, all the way as far as kind of Auburn down to Arnold at the other end in the south. And so we're blessed here because we're at this kind of perfect altitude. It's anywhere from 1,000 feet to 2,000. We're at the tail end of it. And that's, you're right, Chris, that's what's hard, is that we're not in a major metro area. People have to make this a destination trip. It's a long drive, there are not a lot of accommodations. You have to work really hard to find interesting places. And on the way up to us, you pass like 25 wineries. So if you're, unless you have a mission to come here, it's like, we try really hard to do a lot of marketing to drive people up the road. And when they do come, it's like, whoa, this is like such an amazing place to discover. And the wines are, they speak for themselves, I think, and the terroir that we're in and the style of winemaking that we do. So that's it. It's the Shenandoah AVA. If you're going to seek out the Sierra Foothills, is the premier place to be.
Yeah, stay away from El Dorado or Fairplay or Fiddletown or any of those lesser AVAs.
I have to say, some of my favorite wines do come from El Dorado. I mean, it's a higher altitude growing area. It mostly focuses on Rhones. And I've had some fantastic wines out there, different wines, like just things that you just cannot get anywhere else.
And you guys can always look down at Calaveras and be like, hey, at least we're not Murphy's. So,
Right.
No, I love Calaveras, but they're even, further away from anything. There's no reason to go there unless you're going there. But
right.
No, I mean, it had been 2011 was the last time I was in that area. And I remember really, really enjoying it. And then I'd worked with some of your neighbors when I had a wine shop, Brave Vineyards, some of the others that were in and around there. And I'm so excited that we got to kind of revisit, because when I was up there, even just for a 24-hour period, I just kind of fell in love with the area. It has that, I mean, even just the architecture of those little towns, Amador City, Sutter's Creek, or Sutter Hill,
Sutter Creek,
Plymouth, like just have that kind of cool, mid 1800s gold rush era feel, the covered boardwalks and the clapboard buildings and whatnot. It just, you get the nostalgia, but at the same time, there's kind of a modern sensibility to it. So it's really fantastic. And then you have, very cool modern looking places like yours, which, just a beautiful, very modern, very striking tasting room, amazing views coming out of your tasting room and the vineyards. For folks who are interested in coming up, visiting, learning more, buying wine from you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Two ways. They could visit our beautiful tasting room, open Thursday through Sunday, our bistro Saturday, Sunday. So that's, you can check us out at lamesavineyards.com. And our visit us section often has all the calendar of live music and other events. The last 3 weeks, it's been a blitz for me. I did a behind the cellar tour with our club members. I did a winemaker dinner, and then just last weekend we had a wine masterclass with some 24 people around the tasting room inside. So we always have something kind of going on, and So that's one way. You could also order online. There's some great specials and shipping rates available there. And you can always email me too. I do, play an active role in this business and respond to people. And my email is Come, COME, at lamesavineyards.com. One of the cool things about joining our club is you can always request a behind the cellar door tour with me, and I take you and talk about our vines, and we get to taste some of the new vintages coming down the pipe. It is always a super memorable type of event. So please do visit, and feel free to order more wines on our site. We're happy to ship. A little hard to ship in the heat, but outside of maybe the next couple of weeks, we should be getting back to cool weather again.
I apologize. Our house is being invaded either by Russians or North Koreans, or it might be a stray cat that has wandered onto the property, and one of our dogs is alerting me to the fact, if you can hear that in the distance. So that's fantastic. One last question before we kind of open things up to folks. How did you come up with the name La Mesa Vineyards? In the Sierra Foothills, La Mesa, an interesting choice of name.
Yeah, La Mesa is both in Italian and Spanish, means the table. And my fondest memories were around the table with my family. As a kid, we'd be discussing our day and our challenges and adventures. And for me, that was like cherished time. And I wanted a vineyard name that reflected that. So when you have wine with great friends, it's the perfect gathering for talking about anything from the joys you have in life to some of the challenges you have to the dreams that you're pursuing, and hopefully that all catalyzes a great conversation around the table. So conveniently, we are located on a hill too, the table. So our tasting room is perched up above Shenandoah Road, and as Chris said, it is a really beautiful building design. We used the same architect that I had tracked down, that had done 5 other wineries up here that I love their design. And so it's a beautiful glass box, basically like a jewelry box, and everywhere you stand inside, you have an amazing view. So please, come and enjoy the view, come and enjoy the terrace, and it's a great place to hang out on the weekend.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves, and if you don't mind sticking around for a minute or two and willing to answer some question, that would be fantastic.
Sure.